Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my GW23 team selection as we look towards a week where there is once again Haaland uncertainty. The uncertainty, of course, is whether he starts this fixture. We've seen, of course, with KDB coming back that he did spend a little bit of time on the bench before we started to see consistent starts. And we're still seeing, for example, that KDB's minutes are getting managed. I think something very similar could happen with Haaland. And the question, I think, is whether you actually have enough money in the bank to really hold on to a Haaland transfer for 1 week. Because let's say we see once again a lot of transfer movement and some sort of completely blindsided price rise like we saw this week. I think the issue, I suppose, is whether you can actually go into Haaland the week after, right? So if it's a price related issue, I do think that this is a week where just off the bat, I would suggest maybe going for Haaland. Personally, it's the move that I have in mind, but I also have a lot of issues within my team and a lot of injuries that have come up from the previous week. So just quickly recapping on GW22, I ended up getting 73 points. We're now somewhere around the top 2,500 in the world. And part of that, of course, was spurred on by Eze doing extremely well as my transfer in. So anytime you bring in a transfer in and you get an instant impact like that, that is amazing. But unfortunately, the instant impact has also meant that I now have an extra, potentially an injured player. And based on Roy Hodgson's press conference, it actually seems like Eze might be injured and that he's going to have a scan. So whilst Olise actually seems fine, Eze now seems to be the one who's actually injured as a result of that game. I also have a knock from Darwin, and I've just gotten the news on Colwill from Pochettino's press conference that Colwill is probably going to be out for Wolves at home. So I'm now restricted to some really poor defenders for this week, and I don't have my best defender on paper, which is, Wolves at home for Colwill. And now when I look at the midfield, of course, I've got Foden, Richarlison, Saka, which I think I can quite easily play. Watkins and Alvarez, I can probably play, but of course, Alvarez with the asterisk of whether I go to Haaland. And then Darwin, I suppose, is an issue. So I kind of have to make a gut call between Eze and Darwin. Yes, of course, I think if we look at, let's say, Eze and the way Roy Hodgson has managed some players and their injuries, it does seem like he might be ready to play or he could play if he's ready to. But the scan or the news about the scan sounds quite bad. And also with Darwin's case, we know that Liverpool and Klopp himself, he likes to protect his players, particularly from a sports science point of view. So it also really feels unlikely that I'm actually going to get either of them starting. So I feel like I might be forced to make a transfer. And that transfer might actually be to potentially take Darwin out of my team or Eze out of my team, unfortunately, just because I actually need players who will be playing for me in the short term to cover this game week. Because alternatively, when I look at my team, yes, I've got Palmer playing, but I would need to rely on, let's say, Trent, Porro, Gabriel, and Walker. And unfortunately, out of my defense, within a potential 4-4-2, for example, I suppose Trent versus Arsenal isn't a really good fixture. Not to mention that I can't even guarantee right now with Conor Bradley playing so well that Trent can actually start the next fixture. Now, I'm going to take the assumption for this video, for my team selection specifically, that one of my players will play, and I'll just talk about the priority between Eze and Darwin. I think just when we talk about fixtures and assuming that both players will start, I think that Eze, of course, has the better fixture, but I do think there's a bit of uncertainty around his minutes. What we do tend to see is that if, let's say, a player's coming back from injury or a player isn't fully fit, ready to play, I think we've seen Eze come in and play 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. With Darwin, I think he's most likely going to start or not start. If he's not ready for the game, he's not ready for the game. If he's ready for the game, I think he's probably going to start. So I'm going to sort of take that as a potential ability or chance, rather, to go towards Darwin. So that's my sort of immediate thoughts on the matter. And in terms of the rest of the team, of course, for the defense, when we just start off from there, looking at my team selection for this week, Dubravka definitely starts. It's Luton at home. Yes, of course, Luton have been brilliant recently, and particularly from the attacking point of view. The reverse fixture was also really poor earlier in the season when Dubravka, I remember, conceded a lot more than we expected versus Luton away. But of course, this is Newcastle at home, and they have still been, for the most part, a good defense at home this season. And so I still think this is a good opportunity to play Dubravka. Ultimately, Areola just doesn't have a good fixture himself. I will be playing Gabriel because of the news about Colwill. That sort of forces me to play him. I'll also be playing Porro and Walker. Porro and Walker both have away fixtures, just like Trent does himself. But I think that the key thing here, of course, is that I still have a bit more confidence, for example, in the Arsenal offense than I would, let's say, over the Everton one, or even, for example, the Brentford one. Another thing, too, to mention is that ultimately I think I can guarantee the minutes from Porro and Walker as opposed to Trent Alexander-Arnold. Yes, of course, he's coming back from injury, but also with Conor Bradley playing so well, I guess the question can be asked as to whether Trent is even going to be playing, upwards of more than 60 minutes, which is another point of concern. In terms of the midfield, though, for this week, we're looking at playing Palmer, Foden, Richarlison, and Saka. So that's going to be a 4-piece midfield. Now, all the fixtures here are actually relatively good, with exception to, I think, Saka's fixture. But at the bare minimum, you're still looking at Saka actually having a home fixture, which is, of course, nice compared to, let's say, Foden and Richarlison, who have away fixtures. Palmer, in my opinion, has a prime fixture. And I did talk about, for example, Palmer's minutes in the previous match where he got subbed off early versus Liverpool. We haven't seen Palmer actually, get taken off very early much this season. I really think that the unique circumstance is that ultimately they were just getting thrashed by Liverpool. And plus, he also still played 84 minutes anyways. So I'm looking at this as an opportunity to think about, whether we actually could captain Palmer for this fixture, just because he actually has the best fixture out of all my midfielders. And then when I actually look at my sort of front line, I think Watkins, of course, has a brilliant fixture himself versus Sheffield United, and Alvarez and Darwin, I suppose, are the question marks, right? I am sort of playing a 3-4-3 right now, assuming that Darwin plays. I will also discuss maybe in the eventuality that if I actually think that Eze and Darwin are for sure not going to play, what transfer I could actually make in that situation. Right now, though, I think, considering that I have Watkins and considering that I have Alvarez, what would make the most sense for me is actually to go from Alvarez to Haaland and make the transfer that way, assuming that I think Darwin can play or I think Eze can play, because I don't really want to be playing Trent. So that's sort of my assumption here, where fortunately, I'm hoping, of course, that I have a player who's going to actually be able to accommodate for this team and play a 3-4-3, and I can roll the free transfer here for Alvarez, or not roll the free transfer, but actually save a transfer so that I can simply go from Alvarez to Haaland this week, assuming that Haaland actually gets to start here and probably will actually get to play at least 60 to 70 minutes of football, and even though Alvarez might actually play once again another 80 minutes or 85 minutes of football, that I'm still happy long term with making the decision to go Alvarez to Haaland, considering that I think Haaland will start. That's my assumption for now. I just think that it is a good opportunity for Haaland to come back. He has been fit, quote unquote, by Pep for a while, and he is still, a much younger player than De Bruyne as well. I think that is a genuine factor as well when you're looking at players coming back, and Pep also always talks about things like that. If you think about last season as well, when people were asking questions constantly about Haaland and whether his minutes will be managed, Pep was pretty vehement in terms of his response of, how important it is that Haaland is a young player and that we shouldn't have, crazy expectations that his minutes need to be managed constantly as a young player. So that's sort of my point of view there. And Watkins and Palmer, I think, are the captaincy options when you look at the default team selection. So it's actually between Palmer, of course, with a good home game, and Watkins with the better fixture in terms of the opponent, but actually playing away from home. Right now, because I think that we can guarantee 90 minutes or roughly 90 minutes for both players, I would say Watkins is still probably the player that I'd like to prioritize, just because I think there's still a big gulf between Sheffield United as a team versus Wolves as a team. So that's sort of where I'm sitting and leaning on in terms of captaincy for now. However, I think I could very much swing by the end of the deadline into a Palmer captaincy. However, if let's say Haaland is to join my team, I think the question, I suppose, is whether Haaland can get serious minutes. And then the question would no longer be between Palmer and Watkins, but rather Watkins and Haaland. Right now, I think I'm going to take the assumption that Haaland's probably going to play around 60, 65 minutes or 70 minutes. And I'd still probably prefer Watkins given the fixture that he has, given that City are also away from home versus Brentford, and Brentford have actually been a pretty competent defensive team on underlying stats, although, of course, we talk about Flecken quite insultingly quite often. But that's going to be my team selection, assuming that I actually have one person between Eze and Darwin who can actually feature, and of course, I'm assuming that Darwin can start for me. If I don't think that Darwin can start for me, I think I have a couple transfer options that I can make, right? One is actually to transfer Darwin out simply, right? Because if Liverpool don't get the double game week 25 confirmed, and keep in mind that I'm recording this video early on Friday, and by the time this video might come out, Liverpool might actually have a confirmed double game week, which would mean that I'd probably have to keep Darwin. But assuming that I actually might not need to keep Darwin because the double game week for 25 for Liverpool is not going to happen, and maybe Darwin's injury is actually severe, potentially what I'll do is actually just go from Darwin to Haaland and keep Alvarez for 1 week, knowing that I can always go for Solanke as well in the future. If I don't think that Haaland's going to start, I think a simple move from Darwin to Solanke would also make a lot of sense too. You're simply looking at a player in Solanke who's brilliant. I've been very jealous of Solanke owners, and I think this would be a good opportunity to jump ship, considering that Darwin actually has a bad fixture in hand, and Solanke, of course, has a brilliant one of his own account. And as far as, let's say, other transfers as well, just because I actually have, Gabriel and Trent, I just don't really think that I need to stretch towards another defender. I don't think I necessarily need to replace Colwell for now, so I don't think I'm going to be exercising defensive transfer. Do I need to take a hit? I think absolutely not. As I said, within the midfield position, if I don't, let's say, want to transfer out Darwin for whatever reason, let's say Liverpool's double game week 25 actually does get confirmed, I do think maybe a move out from Eze would make sense, because it seems like Eze's not going to play in this Brighton fixture anyways. I've capitalized on the brilliant fixture that was Sheffield United at home, and we do have an opportunity actually to jump into Anthony Gordon. And this is going to be an Anthony Gordon playing centre forward for Newcastle for potentially 2 or 3 weeks, which is insane. So I think I might take that opportunity to jump ship instead and make that Eze transfer. Don't mind, cash out of a player who got me 14 points in the previous week and move on. So that's going to be my team selection for this week. As I said, a lot of things are actually going to depend on, first of all, whether Liverpool's double game week 25 will get confirmed. Second of all, whether we actually think Haaland will start, and whether Pep Guardiola will actually give us any sort of inclination as to whether he'll start. And then third of all, of course, what is going on with players that are injured within my team. Colwell, Eze, and Darwin probably going to be pretty poor for my team as it stands. So I think I will be looking towards one of the transfer plans that I suggested after the sort of default team selection, and be looking to pursue one of those moves before the deadline. This week for the deadline, though, I will be recording at the live stream. Fortunately, most of my sort of long hours for this time in the year are sort of done, and we can sort of return back to live stream on the deadline. Plus, it's a weekend, so I will be around at the deadline. So see you guys there, and take care, and goodbye.